All right, I am here with Shawn Fardink, and he's going to show us how to do the project for the hospital services at the end of the COP1000 course. Do you want to bring that up on your screen, Shawn?
Yeah, give me a second to pull it up.
And how are you today?
I'm doing good. How about yourself?
Oh, fantastic. Getting to the end of the semester, so looking forward to having a little bit more fun over the summer. Oh, you know what? I think I need to enable something. Here you go. See if you can do it now.
Hey, I'm still pulling it up.
All right. While he's doing that, I guess I'm gonna just real quickly show that on. He actually sent me the text file, so this is what we're going to be looking at, and it is a lot different than what we talked about initially. It's a lot further developed than the ideas that I gave him earlier. I tested it out. It looks like it runs pretty well. There's a lot of different approaches that students use for this, and so I liked this approach because it's pretty user friendly. And if you'll notice that all he has to do is have the user type in the numbers of which drugs and which services were used, and then it's going to compute all of those values for them. So they don't have to like type in the name aspirin, type in the name amoxicillin, and all the rest of those. It'll just do it for them. Uh, so the user just types in the numbers. So very cool on that, Shawn. And if you're ready,
Yeah,
I'll turn it over to you.
yeah, I'm ready.
All right, go ahead.
So you can see my screen?
Not yet. Try share again.
Oh, I'm jumping ahead. Right, there we go.
All right, looks good. Talk us through it.
Yeah, so the first thing I needed to do is create a list. These are kind of some dummy values now. The professor did share some sources to go through, but it's a pretty large Excel sheet, so it's a lot of data to go through. So I just wanted to get a program that was up and functional. And I don't even know if this is the end result yet. This is kind of the approach I did to use functions because we just kind of learned classes at the very end, and I didn't get a lot of practice on it. So Jesse and I, we did go over this, um, but I couldn't figure out how to work with the classes, how to incorporate everything, and figure out the structure of the code. So this is what we actually discussed using a tuple, and so it'll give us the drug name, and then it gives us the integer value. Uh, Maybe you can
For,
explain it better.
yeah. So it's the name of the drug and then its price, right? So the name is a string and the price is an integer. Although we might want that to be a float because it could be in decimals. But we can always address that later.
Yeah, I didn't address it while I was just doing this kind of rough draft because yeah, I just tested with the whole values, nothing with the decimals in it.
Sure. All right, cool. Now let's take a look at some of these functions.
Yeah, and I also, made sure to put notes because I did have to use a little assistance from ChatGPT just to get the structure. I had the
Mhm.
idea of how it was going to flow, but just some of the code I had trouble remembering how to write. Um,
So
so
yeah, I want to talk about ChatGPT for a second and um, the my thoughts on that because as a tutor, I actually see it as a really important learning tool, but there's some caveats to it. So if you're watching this and trying to decide if you should be using AI, I think the answer is yes, but the question is how are you going to be using it? And so let's imagine this is your starting point and this is your um, ending point, and you want this program to be able to do a variety of things, but there might be some gaps in your knowledge. So like, let's say this line represents your knowledge on a variety of topics, and you just have a few gaps in your knowledge that would make it really difficult for you to get from the start to the end if you're doing it by yourself. but ChatGPT can sort of, bridge over these little gaps for you and get you across to be able to do something that you want to be able to do. And this will work. This is this is almost like the Google search approach, because if you're stuck on something and you want to go to Stack Overflow, or you want to go and Google, um, any of the online resources, there's just tons of online programming resources now. And if you want to look up any of those things and read about what's going on, that'll get you over these little hurdles here. But that said, if you're trying to get from if your situation is not that you have that kind of a knowledge base, but that you have like this kind of a knowledge base where it's like maybe one or two little things, and then ChatGPT is trying to do almost all of it for you, like except for the one or two little things that this result will not work. Your bridge will collapse, right? It's not going to get you from point A to point B. These things are going to break. And so I want to be realistic about what you can expect from ChatGPT. It is not going to just do a whole project for you and have that project be successful. It will help explain certain individual topics to you. And that's been my experience. I've tried to build programs like this where I didn't even know the language, and I was trying to build something with it. And you can get started with it, and you can make a little bit of progress, but it really, you're not going to be happy with what you get. So that's just my thoughts on Chat GPT there. No shame in using it. You should definitely be using it, and I'm glad that you did, Sean.
Yeah, and I wish that my gaps weren't that were small, and but I think they're a little bit larger. That's why
Hmm.
I'm scheduling additional tutoring to kind of help fill in some more of those gaps. And then
Well, I'm glad you did that too. Yeah. So there's no shame in using ChatGPT, and there's no shame in reaching out for help either. So you're doing all the right things here, Sean.
yeah, so this first function is just a function that capture the stay information. So it's just name capture stay info, uh, and then stay type is going to equal user input. And then the statement right here is just asking whether they're inpatient and outpatient. And then the /n is just to help with white space and spacing, just so it looks cleaner when they run it. So when you run it, and that is just prompting the user for I for inpatient, and then an O for outpatient. I originally wrote it out as inpatient and outpatient, and kept it down here in this other function, and kept it lower. And if they wrote, in caps, or that, it would capture that and keep it, lowercase. But actually scheduled another tutoring appointment. They made the recommendation of just making it more simple, just using one letter, just to avoid any confusion with misspelling or anything.
Yes. Make it as easy as possible on the user for sure.
Yeah, so just to run it, it's going to prompt them how many days uh, did they say, because we selected inpatient. You just select 5, and down here it's making the calculations for inpatient daily. Is we set that variable to equal 1,000. And then if we go down to the other functions, we can look at the calculations. It's just simple multiplication. So after they do that, it's going to show the total room charges and then display a list of medications. And I couldn't figure out, like, one thing ChatGPT mentioned, that you could do it by comma, but I didn't like that approach. I thought it would be more confusing, so I just made it just select one, and then it'll keep going in a while loop.
That's exactly what I would do too. Yeah. I mean, there might be more user-friendly ways to do it than this. And, if there's user experience experts watching this, they're probably like, oh, they should do it like this way or that way. But I mean, for a student project, I think this is really well done. And I think that's an easy approach to just collecting it one line at a time.
Yeah, so after you select that, you just hit 0 to exit, and then it's gonna display the total medication cost. And then for services, you just list the services and same approach. And then 0 to exit, and then you'll get your room charges, medication costs, and service costs. They'll make those calculations.
Mhm. All right, cool. So yeah, so that's the functionality of the program, and keep walking us through what the code does there.
So we have the function that calculate room charges. So it's prompting, I created a variable for outpatient. It's a 0 because obviously if they didn't stay in the hospital, then they're not going to be charged for a room. And then it's just a if else statement. Stay top, and then here's that lower functionality I discussed. It doesn't matter if you enter a capital I. It should. Oh, it didn't work.
Well, I think you just got to run it again.
Ah, okay. Yeah. So it doesn't
So
matter if the user inputs a cap lock or lowercase, it will pick up that I, and that's what this lower function is. And then if it is I, it's going to calculate this variable room charges with a number of days that they input, plus that variable inpatient daily, which is set to 1,000. So if we set this to 5, it's going to multiply for 5 days at 1,000, which would give us 5,000 in total. And then the lift statement in that same function for O is going to give us room charges. And then I guess really this is really even now that I'm looking at, it's not really necessary, right, Jesse, to make that
y-
calculation or
yeah, that's right. Room charges could just equal 0 if the stay is. I mean, but there could be some outpatient fee at a later date. So if you have some sort of just minimum cost for coming to a hospital and being seen, um, that would be easy to add that in and just make it like a um, I don't know. But yeah, you could just have room charges equal 0.
so you could always recall that variable in like another if else statement if
Yeah,
or
yeah, or actually you could have it be where if it's this is probably what I would do is if it's I, then room charges equals number of days times inpatient daily. And then I would just get rid of this entire block because um, you have the else statement saying that the room charges is equal to 0. And if it's not an inpatient, then the room charges are 0. So that's probably the easiest implementation of that.
yeah, and the instructions in the assignment was just for inpatient to calculate the number of days.
Hmm.
So she could have made it harder and made a calculation for outpatient where this would have made more sense.
Right,
But okay.
exactly, yeah. So and that infrastructure is there if you want to keep it. It doesn't break the program having it in there. It is a little bit extraneous, but it's not the end of the world if you leave it in.
Yeah, and then just at the end, it's just going to return room charges based on these if else statements.
Hmm.
And these functions are to display the medication list in the service list. Um, this is something where I got stuck on. I get confused with the I.
Hmm.
It's one thing that confused me. Maybe you can explain it. But I think
Sure.
this okay.
Yeah. Well, what were you going to say about this section before I like
I
what
was
specifically is the confusion
I
there?
was well, I I'm just not sure like for like is that just for a for statement that I or
Yes, although you can increment with a while statement as well. So um, let's look at each of those scenarios. So I'm going to type it in off to the side here, and we'll just kind of go through it piece by piece. So for I in range length of medication list, let's look at what's going on with that. this is going to be, and I'll just kind of like highlight one piece at a time with different colors. So this piece right here of the I is a variable that you are declaring within the for loop. It only exists within the for loop. As soon as the for loop is done, that I is done. That 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 variable, which is going to be an integer, is going to be over. And over the course of the life of that variable, what it's going to do is the range is a function that is associated with, like, do you remember sequences and series, like the summations and things like that?
Yes.
So if you have like ace of n equals ace of 1 plus um, d times n minus 1. You remember these kinds of arithmetic sequences from, I think, pre-calculus maybe, or uh, possibly even some algebra classes. But the, something like this is basically saying whatever n value you're looking for, it's going to be based on whatever the initial value was plus some common difference times the number that you're looking, like the index of the sequence, and minus 1. So if you want the fifth term of the sequence, you can find it using a formula like this, right? And so if you have ace of 1, let's say ace of 1 is equal to 3, and ace of, and d is equal to 2, then what would ace of 2 be? That would require you to add the common difference. So it's going to be 3 plus 2 is going to be 5. Ace of 3 would be 7. Ace of 4 would be 9, and so on. So this is like a little bit of a refresher from math classes that you might have taken that approach this concept in a similar way, where what the I represents is this index part right here. This is the portion of this process that relates to that variable I.
So it's letting the program know that it's going to be a series in within this length of the
Right,
medication list. Okay.
right. And we're gonna be doing something, and so yeah, that length of the medication list, however long the list is, length, this right here is a function that tells Python, okay, calculate what the length of that list is, and then return it as an integer.
And then within the print statement, you're pulling that range and you're adding +1, like you're going in sequence. I just wasn't sure how the sum got calculated. I'm sure that's down here.
So yes, the thing is that in Python, everything is 0 indexed. So this is going to be, um, like that example that we had where it was ace of 1, ace of 2, ace of 3. Not so with Python and most programming languages. They're 0 indexed. So ace of 1 is really ace of 0. The first term is really ace of 0. And then the next term is ace of 1, and the next term is ace of 2. So if you have in other words, if you have a list of data, um, scroll back up again to the to the tuples that you had for medication and for services. So this first tuple is that aspirin and 15 under medication list is actually index 0. And then ibuprofen 10, that's index 1. And then this acetaminophen, that's index 2, and so on. And so that's how we like think of the address of that data, if you want to think of it that way.
So if it wasn't programmed to +1, then it would have ran an error or would have started
It wouldn't
off.
have lined up with what
Okay,
You're expecting, so the user is typing in a 1 for aspirin, and you want the index of 1 to correspond with aspirin, right? So if we scroll back down and let's talk about what it's doing when it prints out that medication list, because this is the portion where it's printing out that medication list. So what we want it to do is give the user the information that they're going to need to know in order to correctly communicate to the program what medications that customer has used. And so that is going to be the medication. So for I in range length medication list, it's getting the medication and the price from the tuple. That's this portion right here. It's saying medication list and then um, I, where it's for each of the values in your list, it's breaking apart the tuple, and it's saying that this is the medication, the string is being assigned as medication. Let me type, that's better. Medication, and which is a string, and then price, which is an integer within that tuple.
okay, yeah, that makes sense. And then the print function is pulling that, and then medication, and then price. Okay.
Yeah, so it's going to take whatever the if we zoom in on that, I think this is an I. It's hard to see it. It looks like a 1, but I think it's an I.
Yeah,
And
that's an I. Plus
yeah,
one.
yeah. What this F string is going to do is it's going to it's like a really convenient way of just putting values in and keeping the formatting the way that you want it, like having really nice control over the formatting. It's not the only way that you can get this to print like this, but it's probably the nicest way. And so it's going to be one more than whatever the n is of this, or remember how we were saying like ace of 1, ace of 2, ace of 3. So that plus 1 statement, exactly what we talked about. It's converting it from being 0 um, indexed the way that Python is to being 1 indexed the way that our medication list is. Because you see here how it wants people like 1 indexed lists when they don't have much of a background in computer science or something. Like they want it to start with 1. That's what makes sense.
Yeah, and that would be more user friendly because the
Yes,
zero wouldn't make sense, and we needed that to exit the program.
that's right. Yeah, you have a specific use for 0, which is to exit the program. Exactly. So when the user enters 0, because that has a special meaning, yeah, it's really important to have this here, that it's going to display uh, the numbers as we need here. And then there's like a period after to show that it's like and you can see that all the periods displayed in the medication list as well, which is just a nice formatting kind of thing. It puts the string of the medication, which is in these brackets here, and it puts the price variable, which is in these brackets here, and it's all formatted just very nicely to give it a good look.
Yeah, and that F in front of it will allow you to input uh variables with a string. Usually they don't play nice. Like if
That's
that
right.
F. hmm
Yeah, yeah. You got to give it the F before that string, and then that allows you to use those curly brackets to put in variable names. That's exactly right.
Yeah, and it's the same approach for the service list. I was able to mirror that, and it worked
Hmm.
out nicely. So, and
Yep.
then I made sure to put comments because I figure we'd be going over this too. That's one thing that I've been trying to implement while programming and put as much comments as I can so I can understand what's doing what. So
Cool.
it helps. Yeah, it helps with
Cool. Yeah.
readability.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. All right. So medication selection. What's going on with that?
So we're defining a function, get medication selection, um, and then we left the parentheses inside blank because I don't think we're pulling from anything. We're kind of creating a new function, so it wasn't really necessary.
Okay.
Um, and then selections, see, that's where I kind of get confused with just putting a blank value there. I guess it
Mhm.
would be the same thing as a function. Um,
Well, so selections is being initialized as a list, and then
okay.
we can use that list later. Um, so, but it's starting as an empty list.
Yes, I don't know if it gets, oh, so a return selection is after we, oh, that's a get service selection. Okay, so it's its own function.
No, it does for this too. You've
Oh,
got, yeah,
okay.
you've got right over here return selections. That's what the get medication selection and what the get service selection do. So it's almost the same kind of thing. It's just that it's separating uh, which kind of service it is.
Okay, so now I see why it's just being declared because we need to create a variable name selection,
Hmm.
and then it's going to be integer values, and it's requires input, and it, here's a string asking please select your corresponding medication, and that's, you can see this right here, the
Hmm.
output of the program. And then there's just another if else statement. If selection is zero, break, which
Hmm.
is what we were discussing before, how we needed to implement that zero to end the program,
Hmm.
or actually end the selection of the list.
Exactly. Exactly.
And then, so if the selection, see, this is where it kind of confused me on this line. If the selection was less than one, oh, if one less than selection, or less than length of medication list. Oh, okay. So it's kind of saying if it's not within that list.
Yeah. So this is saying if the selection is within those boundaries of and it includes one, and it includes the medication list, the length of the medication list. So it's going to have those two integer values, and as long as selection is between those two, then what we're going to do is append that selection to our list. And notice that we're turning it into an integer. So whatever selections we're getting, they're being converted into integers. And this is happening in the context of a try, except because if we don't put it in the within a try except, there's a very good chance that what we're going to get is an error because the user might type something that is not an integer. And we can handle that within the context of a try except block, but if we just tried to handle it as if we knew that it was an integer, but it wasn't, then our code's going to break. But here we can put it inside a try except block. And then if it is an error, then we can tell the user invalid input, please enter a number, and then cycle through the while loop again. The only way out of this while loop is to give a break. And that is to enter in a 0. Other than that, we're going to keep on cycling through over and over again, giving it real values or giving it wrong values, in which case we're going to get invalid input. But the only way out of this loop is through the break.
So with the service selection, I think it produces an error if you pick the same number twice, which is, I think we should look at that and see. All right. So,
Well, that seems like something we would want it to do anyway. So yeah, 0 gets you out of there. And then let's try it with, yeah, 1, 1. No, it
oh,
looks like it's letting you do it.
oh, so maybe that's something we can program
That
into it then.
that's something that can be improved. Yeah. So let's make a little note in our chat of things uh, to be done.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you would need it if you're, maybe if you're inpatient, you get multiple X-rays and you get different blood work, but maybe
Right.
for outpatient, you're not gonna go there for the day and get 5 X-rays. So it would have to be I don't, it would have to be applied for outpatient. So I
Okay.
don't know if it would be added in this function.
Yeah, so I put it in as something in the chat, multiple entry checking. That's something for us to do. So we'll come back to that. Let's keep going through what we've got here.
Yeah, so I mean the get service selection, it it looks very similar to the get medication selection, which
Absolutely. In fact, the only real difference I think is, at least on the user end, is where it has please enter a number between, yeah, corresponding. So here it says services, and then if you scroll up a little bit, I think it says medication. Yeah, it says medication choice and then services provided. And so that's, I think, on the from the user's perspective, really the only difference that those functions have. And so you, because of that, you might actually want it to be a single function instead of duplicating that into two separate functions. And you could pass it a phrase here of whether this is medication or whether it's services provided. And so you could have, like, when you're doing the function call, you could control it there and say, okay, we need to do this for the medication, and we also need to do this for the services provided. And that way you could reuse the same function, but you would have to, again, you'd have to let it accept an argument to let it know what to print right here for whether that should be services or whether that should be medication.
okay, so get service selection, and then we would put service list inside of this
I would say
function.
service type. I would say service type.
Service type. Okay.
Yeah. So because you're that's the core difference between these two functions is what it's going to display to the user, whether it's going to be medication or services provided. And we could put that in here as medication. You know, we could have it, we can have that passed as a variable named like uh, expense type or something like that. You know, and it would prevent you from having to write the same function twice, because that's essentially what you have here is you've written the same function twice. And fair enough if it's a copy and paste, but it just clutters up your program a little bit.
I didn't know how to approach that. So like, I got this one and then I'm like, oh, with services, I could write out the same similar function because the lists are similar and requiring the user for the same input. I
Hmm.
just can write it out different, but that's good to know that you can incorporate just one function and just have it pull from
Yeah, if you give it the missing parameter, because again, really the only thing was whether this is a medication or a service that you're using. And as long as you already printed out the menus of those, and you're obtaining the lists of these and then supplying it back, but they both are going to be lists. Like the output is in both cases going to be a list. It's either going to be a medication list or it's going to be a services list. And you're even calling it the same name. You're calling it selections. So uh,
oh yeah, that's true.
yeah, and you're getting
I was gonna say, could you do the same thing for the list then, or no?
yeah, you absolutely could do the same thing for the list, because those are uh, again just the um, medication list and the services list where you're really seeing a difference. Otherwise, it's just it's just a list that you're supplying, and in fact, you're giving it that anyway. You're calling it services list here, and you're calling it medication list here, but you could call it something more generic, like um, data list or something like that. And then it wouldn't matter whether it was medication or whether it was services. It's handling it either way. It's handling it the same way. The only difference is that right here you would make this an F string, and you would have it say either medication or have it say services, depending on type, which data type we're working with. So yes, you could consolidate this into a single function as well. They call that refactoring when you're maintaining the same functionality, but you're doing it in a different way when you're just kind of redesigning your functions a little bit, the internal workings of it.
Yeah, because if this was a larger program, we would want to utilize that, 'cause then it would be a nightmare to kind of go in and manage.
Yeah, and so yeah, that's a really good point. That like, let's say that there's a change in the computation such that these things now have to have some sort of fee attached to them or percentage tax applied to them or something like that. And suppose that you have this in multiple functions all over the place, and it's each one is its own thing. And so you might remember to apply that percentage change in some of the functions, but not in others, right? And so you might, but by consolidating everything, all that identical functionality into a single function, you're centralizing where those kind of changes and updates would have to be made, which is a lot more maintainable.
So, and it looks like we can, since we're speaking on this subject, we could probably do the same for these two for the calculations, because they do look identical. And
Yes, yes. And this is another one of those things that ChatGPT may or may not point out to you. You could ask it like, do you see anything redundant here? Anything that I could, try to consolidate? But if you don't think to ask that, it won't necessarily volunteer it, right? So, um,
yeah, and that goes into the argument you were making about those gaps to fill in. If you didn't know about that, you wouldn't know to ask ChatGPT.
right.
So
Yeah,
now that I know about that, I can utilize it to see how that would be written out, and I can learn from that. So,
exactly. Exactly. Yep.
but I was wondering why you needed a plus and an equal sign here.
So what
What?
you're doing in this for each selection in the selection that you're passing it, you're starting with a total cost of 0, and then you're adding in from your medication list, which is a global. You're able to access this because it was globally declared at the beginning of your program as a list. So the medication list is being accessed, and then you're selecting whichever one that was. So your selection from the user, if they selected 4, that's really index 3 in your list, right? Because you have a Python list where amoxicillin, which they would have typed in as 4 under the medication list, would actually be uh, indexed in your list as this is 0, 1,
Yeah, it'd be two.
2, 3. So amoxicillin, which is 4, would actually be one less than that, which is 3. And so that's what this -1 is doing is it's converting it back into something that's going to match your list index. And then
And
this
then
one, what is that one there?
that's what I was gonna ask you about. I don't even know if it's necessary.
It's absolutely necessary. Yes, yes.
Oh, okay.
Scroll, yeah. So scroll back up to um, our declaration of the medication list or medication costs. Yeah, keep going, all the way at the top.
Oh, okay. So the list.
So just like how a list, so if you have um, my list equals first, second, third, if you have something like this, the index is going to be 0, 1, and 2, like the address of where that thing's located, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's true if you have my list, and it's also true if you have my tuple. So my tuple is going to be first, second, and 3.
Oh, so it's only pulling from those integer values then.
That's right. That's what it's doing is that this name of the drug is the zero index. Its price is one. And so that's why we need the one, because we want it to add up all the integer values of the drugs that the user had selected.
Yeah, if we didn't select that, it would what? I guess it would try to pull from the zero, the
It would
first
take the whole tuple.
instance.
Yeah, it would take
Oh,
the whole tuple. And you can't add a tuple with another tuple like that when you've got string values in in one of the indices and um, an integer and another. It's a mess. You can't do that. You want it to add. You're trying to get a total, so you want it to pull the integer values which are in the index one of each of those tuples, and that's why you're adding that integer value. So this whole thing right here of medication list selection minus one, one, this whole thing is going to crunch down to become an integer, which is the price of that particular item, that particular medication or service in the case of the other function. And
yeah. So it's
yeah,
taking whatever the user enters and it's subtracting one, so it pulls the appropriate
correct.
or at yeah.
Yep.
And again, over redundancy. Now that I know that, I can get this code a lot shorter.
Yep. Oh yeah, you can almost cut your code in half. I mean, not quite, because not everything was redundant, but some of these main functions were, and you can definitely rewrite that to accept an additional field that's going to tell that function whether it should be a medication or a service, if that's even necessary. In this one, I don't think it's even necessary at all. I think because nothing here hits the user's eyes. There's no print statement on any of this stuff. So it's all happening behind the scene, and it's going to treat, and it needs to treat the whether it's a medication list or whether it's service list. You're passing it that list. Oh no, 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 you're not actually. You need to tell it which list to pass, or which list to call. So this, yeah, you're gonna need to tell it. You're gonna need to pass it which list you're working on.
Yeah, it's definitely a good opportunity to get some more practice with functions
Yeah,
and
I would have passed it the list anyway. I would have passed it that as a parameter rather than calling it as a global variable. Just as good practice. Global variables are, I mean, for a small program, it's whatever, but and it is a practice you want to get into, that any dependencies that you're going to be calling in a function, you better pass that to the function. Don't look for global values like that.
yeah. I know it seems like I got away with a lot more. Like you said, it's a smaller program. That's really why I was trying to get more practice with class. But I'm just trying to get something done. It's the end of the
Yeah.
semester, so at least
Oh
like,
yeah.
oh, I have something I can submit. But now I have time to play around with it and have fun with it instead of being all stressed out the
Yes.
whole time.
Yes. And that's really I see. I love that attitude, because you can turn a project like this in and you can get a good grade for it as long as it meets the criteria and all is said and done. But like, the real fun of programming is trying to make it into a game where you're trying to make it the best thing that it could be. And you're sort of in competition with yourself to improve on what you started with. And that's how you get good, to put it bluntly. Like, it it's not just meeting the minimum requirements of an assignment and getting a grade. It's in, like, how, asking yourself, how can I make this better? What can I do differently? What can I improve on? But having said that, don't overcomplicate it. And I'm glad to see that you pulled away from some of the recommendations that I suggested with classes and dictionaries, because you weren't totally comfortable with those yet. And you'll practice them. You recognize the importance of them, but stick with what you can get to work, that you understand, and that you can feel confident turning in and explaining. Because if you were trying to use these classes and stuff, as powerful as they are, it's kind of a headache for you right now, and it's not necessary. And so that's a good trade-off between learning new stuff and sticking with what you're on solid ground with.
Yeah, and also I like more project-based stuff in with these program classes because the textbooks I don't really get a lot out of it, but when I do a project, it opens up the world of program because I mean, I was thinking like you can even probably import text files and that Excel sheet and have it set up with tables and prompt the user what table to select. And there's so much stuff you could do with Python, which is cool.
Yes, absolutely. That's one of the really powerful things is, and so you could have a separate file that does contain all that data, and you could have, you know, with blank open, or however you want to structure it. But yeah, you can open those files within your Python, and we talked about the approach for opening files a couple chapters ago. Um, and yeah, I think that was one of the other videos that you watched, right?
Oh
The
yeah,
file
that
opening.
helped tremendously because I was completely lost with that. I was like, oh my God, thank you.
Yeah, yeah. Well, and I think this will help some folks that are maybe completely lost with this to start getting some grounding in it. And if you can explain it, that's when you really know it. And so I always like to challenge students to explain what they've done and what they're working on. And the rest of these, it looks like they're just function calls. You're just
Yeah. Hmm.
you're just calling each of those functions. And so yeah, no, great job. And I hope the grade goes well for you, and the class has been fun, and that your future classes are going to be even more fun.
Yeah, and that's another thing with ChatGPT. I think it enables programming, like, because it gets very stressful and you can start to self-doubt when you can't figure something out. But if you can utilize some AI to help you at least finish your program, it kind of keeps that fire lit, you know, to,
Yeah, yeah, you get a sense of accomplishment when you actually understand what's happening, and when you can explain the code. Like you may not necessarily be able to write all of this again from scratch, off the top of your head, but it's not the worst exercise to try to do that anyway, and see if you could do it completely without ChatGPT now. But it is kind of like that bridge. It's sort of like the same kind of thing as having the answer key or something like that. It's almost the same principle where when you're first learning, it really helps to have the answer key. That's why the instructors will give you the solutions, right? That's why there's solution manuals and stuff like that. So ChatGPT is sort of like a universal solution manual for a lot of different things, but it's an imperfect one. And so uh, no, great job utilizing the resources that are there for you, but also making sure that you really have a firm grasp on it. And yeah, why not try and see if you can redesign this program and implement it again from scratch yourself, and more efficiently this time without the redundancies.
it sounds good. All right, thanks, Jesse.
Cool, Sean. I'll see you next time.
All right, bye.
Yep, bye.